Yes, welcome everyone. My name is Laura Kreider. I am an artist support consultant and fellow choral singer. I have the pleasure of supporting Jocelyn and Graphite Publishing and have collaborated with Eugene on past projects. And we're getting together today, as you know, to celebrate the release of AMASS and learn more about the piece, how it's come to life, and much more. I had the honor of premiering this work a handful of years ago, and as a lifelong seeker and deep thinker on these things, it's just really stayed close to my heart. So to me, a mass is a modern classic that I think holds a really important place in the choral canon. So let's do some brief introductions with Jocelyn and Eugene, and then we'll get started. So as many of you know, Jocelyn composes music that's been described as simply magical by Fanfare magazine and dramatic and deeply moving by the Star Tribune here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where I'm zooming from. She is a pioneer in the field of composition, pushing the expectations of musicians and audiences with large-scale multimedia works, electroacoustic music, dance, and opera. Her melodic music is rhythmically driven and texturally complex, rich in color, and deeply heartfelt. A champion of the female spirit, many of her projects focus on the stories of women. She's co-founder of Graphite Publishing and the band Nation, singing her heart out every chance she gets. Hey, Jocelyn.
Hello, Laura. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. And now let's introduce Eugene. Eugene is a two-time Michigan Emmy Award winner, a 2017 Sphinx Medal of Excellence recipient, and a 2015 Grammy Award nominee. Eugene is recognized as a leading conductor and pedagogue throughout the U.S. and abroad. In addition to being the founding director of Exigence, Eugene is the director of choirs and an associate professor of conducting at the University of Michigan. Recently, he was named as the 5th artistic director of the two-time Grammy Award-winning ensemble, the Washington Chorus in D.C. Hello, Eugene.
Hi, Laura. Hi, Jocelyn. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. So good to see so many friends.
This is great. So I'm just going to share a little bit about AMASS, and then we're going to get started. So about AMASS, this is a new release. This is Jocelyn's setting of the Roman Catholic Mass. In AMASS, it's been championed by Eugene and the University of Michigan Chamber Ensemble in this album. So this work stands apart from the mass settings of other composers who've practiced this kind of centuries-old genre. While the music relies on the traditional mass structure, it incorporates the spiritual writings of a really diverse group of thinkers. In this way, the music is less about a particular religion and instead reaches towards something, indescribable, ineffable. And today's a chance for us to hear all, from Eugene and Jocelyn about this incredible work. I have some questions to guide us along, but this is definitely a space for everyone. So if you have a question at any point within the hour, feel free to throw it in the chat. And Erica and I will make sure that it gets folded into the conversation. So I'd love to get started. Jocelyn, can you share a little bit about how AMASS came to be, how you found all of these incredible texts, what was the genesis of this?
Well, so I started this project when I was in my 20s. And I think it's one of those things that as a choral musician and a composer, setting your own mass, having your own mass setting is kind of a rite of passage, it feels like, as a composer. And so I knew I wanted to do it, but I also knew that I needed to make it my own. And so I think the challenge for me was figuring out how to make it my own. So what's interesting about it is that I didn't know the shape it would eventually take when I started composing it. So I wrote the Sanctus and the Benedictus, and then the Gloria. And then that's when I found this amazing book. It's called Love Poems from God. Now, this is what you call a well-loved book, right? With so many tabs, so many amazing poems in here. And even, it's been in my library for a long time, so it's all faded. But this is a book that features translations by Daniel Ladinsky. And this is where all the poetry from AMASS came from. It was all sourced from here. Which was lovely, because then I was just getting permission from Daniel Ladinsky on his own. But reading this book changed my life, changed the way I think about my spirituality and my journey. through religion and what it means to be and what I want it to be. And because I feel like it's a never-ending one. It's a journey I'll be going on my entire life, and in different times of my life, I'm sure I'll feel differently about it. And a lot of the poetry in this book kind of recognizes that and accepts that. And I think that's what really spoke to me when I was beginning to write, when I was beginning to form the actual libretto of what AMASS would eventually become.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Jocelyn. I love seeing and learning how composers find their texts and what inspires them. Eugene, like, how did you first come to know of Jocelyn's work in general, and then what brought you to program AMASS specifically?
Well, many of you may know that I used to be director of choirs at Macalester College, and it was during my tenure at Macalester College that I first got to know Tim and Jocelyn. And I fell in love with both of their music. And while I was a professor at Macalester, I was fortunate enough to go to the premiere of AMASS. And when you hear a concert and you know that somehow or another, you don't know the date, the time, or how and when, you are going to be connected to that composer and that work. And I remember telling Jocelyn, I don't know when I'll be able to do this, but I am going to perform this piece one day. It deeply moved me. So I want to give not only, of course, Jocelyn her kudos, but Matthew Culleton, as well as the singers, because that performance was really, for me, it's hard to say life-changing. There's so many, great performances, but it definitely ranked up there as a pivotal musical moment for me. And I really honestly did not know when I would get the chance to perform the work, because I knew that, it's for a very advanced choir or professional choir. And then you have to have all of the instrumental support. You have to have a community of cellists or be able to hire all of those cellists. And so all of the stars aligned. And in 2019 at the University of Michigan, we were able to produce this work. And Jocelyn, gave me permission to produce a first professional recording. And that's, so for me, it was like, wow, that connection from hearing that concert to then realizing that performance when I became director of choirs at the University of Michigan. It was meant to be. But again, I didn't know when I first heard the premiere how that would connect. So
I love that. Thanks for sharing that. And I how, like you said, like these like life-changing moments, there are certain pieces of music that I am a culturally Jewish person, but fairly non-religious. And that experience of singing AMASS to me just kind of felt like church, like whatever that means, church in like the largest sense. So that's always stuck with me too. Yeah. So I'm sure we have some conductors listening in, and I'd love to learn, I'm sure everyone would love to learn, like, what was the actual process of preparing and building the ensemble for this?
well, definitely the chamber choir at the University of Michigan is normally between 35 and 40 singers. And for me, I knew that this concert, I needed more because it is double choir. You think about the basses and their tessitura and the sopranos. And so for this piece, I intentionally for that semester took more singers with this concert in mind. I also programmed, we usually do 2 to 3 concerts a semester. And I also programmed lighter music that I could sing with relative ease on the earlier concerts, because I knew I wanted to dedicate enough time to do justice to this work. For those of you who may not know the work, it's quite eclectic, with everything from, definitely challenges in terms of dissonance repertoire to more, I call it, folk influence, popular styles to traditional classical, double choir, virtuosity, it demands a lot of the chorus and the performers. And so I built a choir that I knew larger than, I think we had almost 50 singers in order to perform the double choir, give it, with justice. And then from there, hiring all the cast. And I knew I wanted to work with professional soloists. One of our professors of cello is Amir Eldon, is the solo cellist, and then those are students that are the cello choir. And then the three soloists, Meg Dudley, Bernard Holcomb, and Jonathan Lash, are professional soloists, two of them which are alums. And so, and then everything else is made of, except for the guitarist, Brett Hogue is another professional, but the rest are all students. The percussionists are all students, all of the singers in the choir. And so, you know, that was also fun to have that collaboration between the instrumental department as well as the choral area, and then alums, faculty, and students all together. I mean, it was really a community experience for us. And so all of that was in mind, and thinking, again, timing, size of ensemble, and again, the forces of soloists to be able to really perform the work well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I mean, you mentioned the instrumentation of it. Jocelyn, can you share a little bit about how you decided on instrumentation for this? I mean, I know you've written so much for choir and for instruments. Tell us how you made the decisions of what kind of came to be the chamber ensemble that was a part of this.
Yeah, well, I really have always loved cello. If I could have played a stringed instrument growing up, that would have been my choice. That would be the one I would pick. Just the low, deep richness of it. And I was also deciding on the instrumental ensemble after I had written, you know, the Sanctus Benedictus and Gloria. And I knew that I wanted a very virtuosic cello soloist who kind of represents, you know, the individual going through this journey throughout the work. But then I also just had this image of, or sound in my mind of four celli doing the Benedictus motive. Benedictus. So that's what that opening movement where you hear the cello solo come in right away, and then eventually you hear that Benedictus come in with the cello quartet. And so that was the main reason why I chose cello quartet, was for that moment specifically. I knew that's what I wanted, and I knew that motive was going to be something that came back throughout the piece. One of my other very favorite choices in terms of the instrumentation was the oxygen tank bells, because this is a very eclectic mass, and you know, draws from so many different faith traditions. I didn't want to use a type of bell that was very connected to any certain faith, because I thought that would be distracting or not genuine, not honest as to what this is trying to do. And since I was kind of inventing my own you know, libretto and doing my own thing, it felt right to try a different kind of bell. And I had recently seen a performance of one of my percussionists doing this piece with a whole, like a wall of oxygen tank bells that he made himself. And I thought they were so neat. They're a very interesting sound because it often has many partials, or, you know, just, yeah, I think in the score I wrote something like, the pitches here might not match what you actually hear. Something to that extent, because the bells, I was really worried about that too, that as soon as we'd start rehearsing with these bells, that the choir would be like, that's not those pitches or what that's supposed to sound like. And that was kind of the point, is that these bells live in a different world, a world that is, you know, has all these maybe different partials that we're not used to hearing together, along with the choir. Yeah. So, and I grew up a singer-songwriter and played the guitar, and I knew as soon as I read the poem in my soul that needed to be essentially a folk song. And so that with guitar, that's one of my favorite musical moments too.
Mine too. I'm sitting here going, absolutely. I mean, I have so many favorite moments, just to be honest. But you know, it's interesting, the baritone. I was speaking to him this summer, and you know, before the release, and he was like, that piece for him, that's his center. He says, I come back to that movement. It just grounds, you know, he says, it grounds me. And I totally understand that. Yeah.
I love it. I mean, I'm curious, Eugene. So you're working with some alum, you're working with some students. Did you have any conversations with any students, or even as a group or individually, about some of this poetry, or this kind of topic? Because there's a lot to process in
Yes.
in the content. I'm just curious.
Sure, we did as much as we could. I mean, that's the challenge. I mean, for me, I knew at the end of the day, this is going to be a recording. So I tended to talk about text while rehearsing. It make it sort of more of a generative approach than one that we sort of stopped and now we're talking about poetry. It happened throughout. I find that's actually a philosophy of mine, that as you're talking about the music, you make a reference to how this text is connecting to what we're hearing. And I find that then it's really more, it's all, to me, seamless and organic. And so that's how we did it. It wasn't, we didn't have, because you could really have had just a week or more just dealing with the text. I mean, it's rich, but we alluded to it, talked about it, not gave references, but we did not have just a text session. I wish the time could have afforded us to have that, but there's a lot of notes to learn. If anyone would, it was funny. A colleague of mine, when the recording came out, said, wonderful work. He says, this piece is challenging. Yes, it is challenging. So yeah, so trying to maintain that, make sure we have the quality. I wish we had more time to just live with all of it, the text especially.
Yeah, yeah, thanks for sharing that. We've got a question from Sam. Sam, I had to go watch the earlier recording to discover what kind of bell was in motion on the professional recording. How much recording time took place before beginning the kind of seaming and editing process?
Yeah, so the recording took place in 2019. And then I don't know if this is specifically what he's asking. And then we started going into, a little editing happened during COVID, but when COVID hit and there was so much virtual singing, I felt like I was living in a studio. I didn't have the bandwidth to do the type of editing this needed, because I was listening to so many virtual recordings and trying to make virtual choirs. So we sort of paused it a little bit until about 2021. And then we began again with the assistance of Paul Radoy, helping me really sort of with all the takes, because we basically recorded the dress, we recorded the live concert, and we had a very quick patch session. So, we didn't have a lot of time. So basically we were drawing from all three of those excerpts, mostly from the live recording, believe it or not, with a few exceptions. And so it's a very tedious process. So 2 years, and I don't know if that's answered the question, was between the time of recording and us going into the studio. And then once you give the masters to the company, the record label, then they take their own time as well to roll it out. So they've had it for many more months prior to it being released.
Great, thanks for sharing that. And Sam, feel free to clarify if you feel like that didn't address it. But it's great to hear about that process. And were you, Jocelyn, were you and Eugene collaborating a lot during the rehearsal process leading up to it, or was it kind of, it's all in the score, run with it? Like what was the interaction between the two of you?
Yeah, I mean, there were some things. AMASS has only been performed in its entirety, I think, 4 times. It's because it's a monster of a piece, and just there's so many moving parts, and the soloists and the instrumental ensemble, so I haven't had, that's one of those things that's wonderful about some of my other works that have been performed a lot, is that I'm able to really perfect the score really quickly, because I have multiple performances right away. And AMASS was so different because it sat there for years. So it was premiered in 2011. So and then it sat for maybe 3 years, and then it was done in New York once. And that was really neat and a different experience. And then it sat again, and then there was this performance here, and there was a performance at Florida State. And I wasn't able to attend the Florida State one, which was too bad. but every time a piece of my music is performed, I learn something about it. It reveals something new to me. And a lot of times there's something that I refine even more within the notation. But yeah, so there were a couple tiny little moments that I think we futzed with, Eugene. Like there was one measure for the cello that I think I completely rewrote, but I think that was it. There was just, it was so very little was completely redone. But yeah, I wrote the majority of this work in my 20s and early 30s when I was very bright-eyed and very, just, I'm gonna, do all these sounds. And then, kind of got to the end of it. It's like, wow, you put all that together. That's a lot that I'm asking for in one piece, which I actually think is very typical for composers to do when they're younger. We just kind of, we want the cake and to eat it too, and just like to feast on everything.
You
So,
write and you say, figure it out.
Yep.
Is what you do. But what I love about working with Jocelyn is, yes, to me, the score is very clear. She definitely gives you a basis, but she also does not micromanage. I felt very free to interpret some things and take some liberties with, some tempi or interpretation. And she sees that as, that's a different take on that. That's different than what I've heard. But that's what I like working with her, because that, to me, everybody then is feeling like they have some ownership of the music. One of my composer friends says, I compose and you realize. That's your job, realize the music. And I feel like Jocelyn allows room for that. And I love working with composers that give me some freedom. Not too much, where it's just like, you don't tell me anything, but just enough where I don't feel like I'm gonna, I'm just so restricted, I can't be free to express. So.
Yeah, I love that. Sam commented, he never would have guessed that, Jocelyn, you wrote this so many years ago. There's so much depth and maturity coming from you back around 2010 or so. So yeah. Paul has a question. So you were talking about coaching a little bit with each other. Paul's curious, Jocelyn, if you coached the soloists as well, or more so directly with Eugene. And he was also curious where the piece was recorded.
Yeah, no, it was mostly Eugene that did the coaching. I did sit in a little bit because I was curious and I was really just wanting to hear them sing. But I was amazed at Eugene, you're just such a wonderful technician. The feedback that you gave to those soloists to just make it even better and more precise. And I was so impressed by that, because sometimes as a composer, I don't always know how to say what I want, especially since I'm a singer, but I'm not, I'm not that kind of a singer that so yeah, I really loved working with Eugene, especially on the coaching with those individual soloists. That was really cool. And it was recorded at the University of Michigan.
In Hill Auditorium, that's our main concert hall there.
Mm-hmm.
Great. There was another question about asking, why are there two movements before the Kyrie? So maybe, Jocelyn, you could share a little bit more about this kind of structure of the Mass and how you made some of those kind of editorial decisions in the structure.
Yeah, I really think, especially as I'm, doing more and more large projects, that I'm a storyteller, and that music just happens to be my medium in which I tell a story. And I think AMASS was really the first time I did that and did it well. And for me, that opening, I knew I wanted it to start with that cello, the introduction of that main voice, that individual voice, and then that the desire, that is what comes next, right? Is like, I want to understand this. I want to know myself. I want to know what I believe. I want to grab onto something. And that's what that poem means to me, the essence of desire. So it felt right for me to put that right away. Like, this is what the piece is about. It's this desire to understand and to learn and to even go through this journey. Because I think I think not all of us do, you know, or are scared to, or, you know, worried about, you know, what our family will think, or, you know, just this idea of, I'm going to be open to whatever, and I'm going to try and figure it out along the way, and without judgment, without, you know, and it felt very vulnerable. AMASS was the first time I felt really vulnerable with a piece of music, because I was sharing so much of what I believe, what I thought, what I think.
You know, I have to be honest, I have now worked with several composers who, it's interesting to hear them talk about their journey as a young composer and how much more they were willing to share of themselves than sometimes as they get older. And I actually, it's interesting hearing you say that. And that's sometimes the thing that draws us so much to it, is because it is so raw and vulnerable. And it's hard to replicate that, I think, as you get older and you have so many deadlines and you have to, you know, I have a question. Are you constantly trying to be that 20-year-old vulnerable composer again?
You know, Eugene, I gotta say that when we were going through the process of mastering and editing, and I was sitting there listening to it a lot again, part of me thought, wow, is this the best thing I've ever written? And will it continue to be the thing I measure everything else against? And I think in many ways it will be. It's who, you know, as you learn, you get maybe a little more jaded, or you learn, oh, I can't do that, because most of the time that won't sound great, you know. You just start to get, you know, a little weighed down maybe on those creative choices. And with this, I was really just without abandon, you know, just doing what my musical instincts were telling me to do. And yeah, I think that's changed a little bit in the past 12 years, you know. So yeah, listening to it again made me think I do kind of want to get back to that 20-year-old composer and find her again.
I love that. I mean, obviously you know, obviously you have more depth, obviously, as a composer, but that reckless abandon, that ability to just be free and not worry. I think as a conductor, I know I'm constantly thinking that as well. You know, how am I letting my interpretations be affected by other factors? You know, the audience or the community worried about how they'll be received, or am I just free to just, you know, settle in and let the music speak and be a vessel for this music, and also add my own, you know, commentary musically to that? And so it's definitely a lifelong journey, and I love hearing that.
Yeah, you know, I'm curious, Eugene, you know, Jocelyn's talking about also just like the vulnerability of just putting it out there and sharing this, and just like not hiding it behind these layers of things. And as a conductor, does that feel vulnerable to you as well when you're on the podium, even though it's not, you haven't composed the art yourself, but you're interpreting it and translating it? Like, is there vulnerability in that as well?
I mean, if
Yeah.
you, I mean, you have, I think if you really want the music to, vulnerability looks different for different pieces and styles and composers. So for me, I like to make sure I'm not getting in the way of what I think this composer and this music is trying to communicate. Sometimes I actually need to be less, you know, flamboyant, because that's actually too much for what this music is. Other times, if I'm not enough, I'm actually holding back what I think this composer is communicating. So I'm constantly trying to find how much and how little, you know, the music calls for. So that's, but yeah, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to take risks and go wherever the music is calling you to go. So I feel very comfortable with that, to be honest. I know I really, you know, I also know that what is a perfect performance? You know, what is, I do take seriously that a conductor's job is to follow the score and then interpret the score. And so I do give myself that permission, because if I'm constantly worried about am I right? Am I right? Is it going to be okay? I'm actually, then that inner talking is the performance, not the music. So I'm very aware of, I have to, even, and I've premiered a lot of music. And because of that, I have to say, okay, you composed it, I'm going to take this now and I'm going to interpret it and make it my own. Because if I'm not really conducting, I call it telling the truth on stage. If I am not conducting from a place of honesty and genuine care and love and knowledge of the score, then I don't think I'm fully telling the truth. And I think that then becomes what the audience feels and hears. Oh, that's my friend.
Well, it goes to this idea of the music coming off the page, which is what composers want to have happen anyway, right? It has to, the page is simply the instructions. And that's why actually when I go to rehearsals of my music, even brand new pieces, I don't like whipping out my score right away. And I definitely don't sit at the piano before I go and play through it again or listen to it on MIDI. I like the fact that I come to it again with fresh ears and try to experience it without that score, without those instructions in front of me, and just focus on the listening and the experience of what's happening, because that's the music. That's the whole thing we're going for, is that.
Serving that music, that,
Yeah.
And that's, I really try to teach that to my singers and the students, is that we're servants of this great art form, and we're lucky to get to share this with others. That's how my mentor taught me, and I try to pass that along because I fundamentally believe that. I want people to hear the music more than they see me, that as a conductor.
Yeah, I think I'd say the same thing about being a composer too. I think what was so surprising about AMASS after the premiere, I was really, really nervous, and there was a pre-concert talk where I had to talk about it. Oh my gosh, this is really scary. It was very scary. And then the amount of people that came up to me after the performance to just say, I've had so many of those same thoughts and feelings before, and it was amazing to hear it that way and have the vessel be music, to have that experience with those ideas. And so I talk about it a lot with my composition students or composers that I mentor, that I've learned that my bravery is rewarded when I let that vulnerability happen, when I'm honest, brutally honest, which can be very scary.
Yes, that's beautiful. And this is also why I push the singers to make sure we perform at a certain level, right? Because to me, it's not only, you don't want to do anything that takes away from the listening experience, good or bad, too much or too, and I think premiering a new work is really challenging, because I always tell people, you are determining for some if they'll ever come back to the score again. That responsibility is huge. And so if they don't choose to come back to the score, let it not be because of your performance. Let it be because they don't care for what they're hearing, but not because you performed it so poorly. I take that, also the onus on that. I take that very seriously with the singers. And that also drives, for me, how we work in those rehearsals, to get out of the way of the process.
Yeah. Well, and that, I'm so happy that you talk about it that way, because I'm sure that because of this amazing recording and the performance that you had of this piece, so many people will find this score now. And I'm so grateful for that, because there was a big part of me that always kind of thought, well, maybe this piece will just kind of sit here and it won't really live like some of my other things. But this one is so dear to my heart, and the performance was so outstanding. And yeah, just listening to that recording it's hard to actually come up with words on how meaningful it is to me.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Eugene.
you. Gosh.
Yeah.
I love all of this. This is, I mean, just hearing people talk about truth and honesty,
Yes.
and how this music is living beyond the moment is, I love it. We've got some really great questions. So yes, thank you everyone. Please keep sharing them either publicly or in direct message. I'd love to share a comment and question by Ruth that's on the call. She says, I found it profound that this work uses an ancient structure, but both updates and holds a new individuality of many needed voices of expression. I'm curious as to how much attention this architectural idea, which spans old and new, was present in your mind, both as composer and conductor.
Yeah, I think this idea of reinventing the mass structure and what it is, what it means to people, there are more and more composers that are kind of digging into it and reimagining it. My favorite example probably is Mass for the Endangered by Sarah Kirkland Snyder that recently was recorded and premiered. And that's all about endangered animals. And just the lyrics, the poetry was commissioned poetry just about these, the animals. And oh, I forget what's the amazing line from the Credo. I believe in all who are silenced, or something like that. So all these animals that don't have voices, they can't speak for themselves. And so I think it is fun to step into an old form and reimagine it. As a creative person, it gives you something to rub up against or bump up against as you create what you're doing. Yeah, I see, Paul, you're nodding your head because you've done this too. Another composer. So yeah, I really love doing that. And then for the listeners, for the audience, they have something, a little frame of reference, to tie them in, to buy in right away.
For me, it played a role in two areas in terms of pacing. And really trying to make sure that that no movement sort of, how do I say this, that people just wanted us to get through it, right? That every movement felt like I'm in this world in this moment, and that it had a sense of arc. I thought for me, it also played a real effect in how the sound I was trying to get out of, whether that was the instrumentalist on that sort of rock type movement to, really trying to vary the colors so that folks really got the soundscape that I think that sort of encapsulated the old and the new. And so I really went there with them on that one movement. It's like, just dig in, it should sound like a rock band here. And, at first they were like, are we supposed to be playing like this? Yes, go there. That's how we want to show this, variety of traditions, from styles to faith. It really all works. But as a conductor, I very much had to be deliberate about that and not shy away from exaggerating those extremes.
Yeah, that's great. And, this kind of ties in. Ellen asks a great question. How has composing and conducting a mass impacted your experience of other masses that you've studied or experienced? I know, Jocelyn, you mentioned Mass for the Endangered. And Ellen, you're kind of getting me thinking too about other multi-movement works too. And what's kind of, how is this unique from these other masses, from these other multi-movement works? I get that can be for either of you.
Well, I live in the world of multi-movement works at the University of Michigan with teaching a graduate program where, my responsibility, my delight is to make sure that those students come prepared to conduct a Jocelyn Mass as well as a Jocelyn Hagen Mass and everything in between. And for me, I love it all. I think it's really understanding what's come before and what has informed it, the context of that work. So I sort of just go in individually with whatever we're doing and really try to find the fundamentally unique aspects of that mass that we are currently studying, because that every work worth spending time with has something that's magical and unique and historic and has stood the test of time. So why? What about that? That's how I enter in. So for me, it's about being fully present with whatever I'm doing. So I sort of don't compare it in that respect. I just I try to give this work exactly what it needs and highlight those unique aspects.
Yeah, I really love the way you talked about that, Eugene, and how um, I think I definitely have a bias for when I'm thinking about new pieces that are written now in this time. Like, how is it connecting to where we are in this moment? And if I don't see that, because one of my other jobs is as a publisher, right? And so I get, pieces submitted and think about them. And it's like, but how does this relate to now? Or how does this relate to you personally? What are we doing here? Why are we doing this? Why is it here? Why do we need to approach it and talk about it and sing about it? And that's, I think, an important question that all creatives have to ask themselves when they're creating something. And so it's always what I'm looking for.
Great. We've got a great question from Colleen, kind of talking about some of the technical challenges. First, she says, I commend Jocelyn's depth and thoughtfulness in composing this work. For those of us who may not have access to the necessary resources to perform the entire work, are there movements that might be more conducive to more developing choirs or ensembles with less instrumental forces at our disposal? I'd love to expose my singers to this work in the future if possible. So yeah, any insights either of you can give about which movements would work well extracted with different ensembles of different ability levels, with different access to instrumentation? Great question, Colleen.
Yeah, it's a little bit daunting, but there are, I know when I originally conceived of the idea, I thought that a missa brevis could be extracted in that way. Like, you could do the Kyrie, Gloria, Sanctus, Benedictus, and then the Where All Are Welcome is kind of what I consider the credo of this piece. But it's never really been performed that way, and that still is quite challenging. I mean, the Gloria is one of those monster movements that because it's very, very demanding for a double choir. But a few years ago, well, maybe 2017, I was commissioned from the Sorel organization to extract a few of the movements to create something called facets of a mass. And this is done with piano accompaniment. And so so that includes, it's more soloistic. But what I love about that is that Where All Are Welcome is included in that. So I do have a version of Where All Are Welcome with piano. And that I should extract that and just make that more widely available, because that also is one of my favorite poems. I mean, I made it my credo. Only at the shrine where all are welcome will God sing loud enough to be heard. So that was kind of the core of what I believed and what I believe. And so yeah, I think, and that is not available yet. So you have to email me and I can get you a score of that.
But even that still has tenors divided into 4 parts, basses into 5 parts. I mean, I just want to I'm looking at the score here. I mean, I don't really know. This is why it took me so long to perform this piece, because I just didn't have the choir who could do it well. I think Agnus Dei is actually a perfect solfege piece. So if Jocelyn would rethink about the accompaniment, maybe it could be a very good piece for rhythm and solfegging. It works. I mean, I think it's all in C with some flat sevenths here and there. I mean, it's I don't know. To me, that movement could work, I think, if you spend a lot of time on rhythm, and there's a lot of concepts there to teach, and there's not as much divisi in that movement till maybe the ending. But that would, for me, would be the most accessible.
That's a great suggestion. And at one point, I did create a version of that with piano and cello solo. So much more easily put together. But yeah, email me and I should make those available. I just haven't put them out into the world yet.
This is great. We'll just keep throwing Jocelyn ideas on how she can revoice and keep sharing this in the world in different iterations, like 2-part youth choir, AMASS. It'll be great. We've got big plans.
I love that.
Sounds doable, right? Ellen, who is a fellow composer, says, I just finished a larger work that weaves together many different sources, similar to AMASS. As composers, we are master weavers. How did the process of weaving this piece together impact your later writing, Jocelyn?
I think the success of the libretto and the storytelling convinced me that, oh, this speaks to me and I need to do this more. So a lot of my other larger works, like Songs for Muska, which that's 23 or 24 movements long and lots of little poems, and some of them are 2 lines, and I created my own poetry with all these 2-line couplets. It boosted my confidence that I could do that and that I should keep doing it. So yeah, I love that. Master weavers. I think that's definitely true. And what's also nice is that if it's under 25 words, technically it's considered what's the term? Fair use.
Oh, okay. Wow.
You know, so like if you use less than 25 words of any poem or speech or statement, you technically don't have to get permission for it.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah, I did that research when I was working on Here I Am, because I was using all these quotes. Like, I have a quote from Oprah, you know, is that okay? Found out, yep, it's okay. So
Speaking of prose, that's cool.
yeah.
I was wondering if we could kind of just pan out a little bit. We've been having such great conversation about the technical aspects, the voicing, the source material, all of these wonderful little nuggets that all make up AMASS. And when we kind of step outside of it, AMASS is out in the world now. With this recording, we know it's going to get out there even broader, to even more ensembles. And I'm curious to hear from both of you. What do you hope that, first of all, what do you hope the audience takes away from their experience listening and experiencing AMASS, but also what do you hope the singers take away from that experience? And I don't know if that's just a selfish question, because I'm a choir nerd myself, and performing a piece is different than taking in a piece. So I'm curious, if either or both of you, what are your thoughts on kind of like those takeaways?
Well, I hope that people, I personally found this piece to resonate best when you hear the entire work. And I hope people will allow themselves the time to listen to it from beginning to end. I think it takes you on a real journey, and it's an experience. And I don't feel like you will fully understand the work until you listen to it in its entirety. And so that is what I hope folks will at least give themselves that experience, because then I think what you take away is going to be different for everybody. And so what I hope my singers take away from it is even just taking a minute to reflect on their own spirituality, if that exists, if they desire to have that. I'd like to allow room for people to enter in their own way. And I hope this work gives them permission to say, I don't have to think this way or that way. For me, all are welcome is what I hear all the time. We're a place where all are welcome. That just resonates in my ears. And even after, performing this work, I still hear those words, because there's so many places as an openly Black gay man in this America and in the world where I don't feel welcome. And that's not necessarily a church community. That can be family or so-called family. And so I hope people, if nothing else, feel like they can enter in their own way, whatever that faith is, because to me, this piece celebrates them. So.
Thank you for that. And I'm so glad you brought up listening it from beginning to end, because I want to tell a little story about the ending, because I knew early on that how it was going to start. I knew it was going to begin with that solo cello, and then the cello quartet was going to come in underneath, before, that we hear all that before we hear the choir start to sing. And then for the longest time, as I was writing it, I thought, and that's how it's going to end too. It's going to end with that individual voice, that cello. And then in the midst of writing it, I was at the very end, and the cello goes up way, way high, very vulnerable, right? Very vulnerable sound. And I was like, that's not it. And the choir needed to come in to support that sound. And so it was this realization, I hope I don't cry talking about it. This realization that the community that you have around you is there to support you, and I think right after I wrote that moment and I was crying, I think I called my mom, and my mom's on this call. Is that true? Do you remember that conversation, Mom? Did I call you? Well, she might have stepped away for a second, but I think that's what I remember. I remember being at the piano, like I can still be in that moment, and remembering that no, I'm not alone. And so that was a big that was a big realization. And then that's also why the piece as a whole is dedicated to the singers, the choir that I was singing in, because I had found so many friends in that ensemble, and I learned so much as a composer in that group. And yeah, so Laura's part of that. Did you know it was really dedicated to you, Laura?
I didn't.
Yeah.
I'm so touched by that. I love that.
Yeah. So all those people that I made music with for many years, and who premiered, well, the whole work, but also the separate movements on their own too. That was, yeah, a very special time of my life, and that's what that ending chord means. Yeah. So it is a journey to get all the way to that. You feel like you're alone. You feel vulnerable. There are people that can support you and that love you.
Yes.
I love that so much. I think that's such a perfect way to kind of close out this conversation. But before we conclude, Jocelyn, Eugene, any other closing reflections that you want to share with everyone in the space tonight? I mean, you've already shared so much. It's okay if there's nothing else you.
Oh, I just thank people for being here. It's nice to reflect, take a minute and reflect about the process and this powerful work. And thank you for being here. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, thank you for being here, and for, yeah, we could obviously spend hours talking about this piece and what it means to us. But yeah, so giving us the opportunity to talk about it here tonight, but then also that we're going to share this later so that other people can listen. That means a lot to me, because there is so much heart in this piece, and unless you dig a little deeper, you might not understand it all. So thank you for being curious about it and for being here to celebrate that with us.
Yeah, and so much of this piece is curiosity. So I love that. And this is so special. So thank you so much, Jocelyn and Eugene, and everyone for joining us and taking the time to talk and share about your experience with the Mass. It's just so heartening to see such a meaningful piece kind of enter the world and know it's going to have a life and be championed by a conductor that just like so honors all that it's bringing to the world and to the table and to the singers, the audience, the cultural conversation. It's just really special. So more of this. I love it. Thank you, everyone. Just as a quick reminder, you can listen to this incredible recording of a Mass by visiting Navona Records. It's also on Jocelyn's YouTube channel. I'm sure it's on University of Michigan's channel as well. Thank you again, and have a wonderful evening.